Hello, everybody. In this video, I'm going to talk about something that I call passive versus active heat training. So what this is all about is basically, have you ever heard of altitude training? Well, it's when people go up at high altitude, right? And they train, let's say a mile high, a mile and a half high, or maybe even 2 miles high. They work out, they exercise. So that's actively training at altitude. But if they were also just living at altitude between their workouts, then they would be doing something I might call passive altitude training. Because when you're living, let's say you work out so many hours of the day, but the other hours are substantial, they add up to a lot. So that amount of time, if you were normally accustomed to living at sea level, then that would be much different. You would have denser air to breathe. But when you're at altitude, the air is rarefied, and so there's less oxygen. So you have to adapt to that, and your body becomes better at breathing, really. So it's just that simple. I mean, you could go into depth about talking about all these little details about it, but I don't want to waste a lot of your time here with that. But the point I'm trying to make is that even when you're not exercising, if you're living at high altitude, just doing your things, whatever you're normally doing, or even sleeping, or just, hanging out, whatever, you're living in a lower oxygen environment, which means that you're continuing to adapt to, being able to breathe better and so on. So that when you go back down to altitude, you can race better, live better, and just have a higher oxygen uptake. Well, now I'm going to make, I mentioned all this stuff about altitude training for comparison because heat training is something that, well, there was a famous runner. His name is Marty Liquori, and I think he was an Olympian, went to the Olympics in the early 70s, and he was a famous American. And he had a book called, I don't know if this is the exact title word for word, but it was something like the handbook, Marty Liquori's Handbook for Elite Runners. Well, anyway, in this book, he briefly mentioned that heat training might be comparable in, value to the athlete to altitude training. In other words, it might be beneficial to improve your fitness to train in the heat. And, we know we can adapt to the heat. So that's just the idea here, is that I'm comparing heat training to altitude training. And similarly, we have something that I'm going to call passive versus active heat training. So active heat training is when you're working out in the heat, like you're cycling indoors, you're running outdoors, indoors, cycling, whatever you're doing, wherever it is. You know what I'm saying? It's hot and you're sweating a lot and you'll need to drink plenty of water. And, it's just a totally hot situation. But even when you're not exercising, you can still do what I would call passive heat training, that's what I've been doing recently. So I have these kind of like little guidelines and rules where I don't use the air conditioning in my home where I live. I have it so that it's like it's just not on. So when I'm gone all day, it gets really, really hot in here. Like I get home from work late, and it's still maybe 80 degrees or in the lower 80s. And then during the day in here, I know it can be as high as 89. Today it got up to 88. And that's in like the main kitchen area where I think it's cooler. But in my room, which is a small room, I have my own body heat contributing to that. So it's really hot. And so I'm getting passive heat training. Like even when I'm sleeping or resting or just doing different things, hanging out, I don't have to be working out. I'm getting this passive heat training in, and it really is interesting, but it has diminished my appetite, which is interesting, but I'm still getting in great workouts. So that might be one of the positive side effects, is that I just need less food, but that I'm still able to work out. I do need to eat enough food, don't get me wrong about that, but I just feel like I've lost my appetite, and I'm occasionally missing meals and eating less and so on. But there's something else to be said, and that is, it's also humid. So the humidity makes it harder for your body to cool itself, with sweat evaporation and so on. But it's uncomfortable when it's humid, but I use like a little fan. Now, this is not an air conditioner. It's just a small fan that blows air on my body when I'm in my bedroom. but it's still really hot. So that's also saving a lot of energy, by the way. But anyway, the point is that I've been doing this passive heat training. So, and also where I work is pretty reasonably hot, depending on how hot it is outside. So basically, I'm getting in this passive heat training when I'm not actually working out. But for my workouts, because it is so very, very hot, I am actually turning on the air conditioning. So I have 3 cases where I may turn on the air conditioning. And one is before a workout, which I usually do now in the hottest part of the summer. But in the spring, as it was getting hotter, I was not. So I was having really hot workouts because when you work out, you really heat yourself up a lot more. But I still wasn't having the air conditioning on. And in a lot of cases, I was not even having a fan blowing on me. So it got really hot and I was sweating a lot more than I usually would. And it makes a difference. You can tell how it affects your exercising. The heat does kind of make it more difficult. It throws in that variable just like altitude training. But back to this. So then I have been having the air conditioning on before workouts, but also when I come home late and it's super hot in here and I haven't had the air conditioning on all day, and then I'm going to wash a load of clothes with hot water and have the dryer on, which is also really hot, that both of those generate a lot of extra heat. So I do have sometimes turned on the air conditioning for that. And then when I mow the lawn, it's super hot out there outside, but I turn the air conditioning on while I'm out there mowing so that when I come in, it's a little cooler. But generally, I do not have it on except to cool down my home right before a workout or something, That's a general rule. These are not absolutely strict guidelines, but I'm definitely trying to do this passive heat training. So I thought I would share that with you all. And it might be something you want to try, and see if you like it. And or you could also have your workouts a little hotter, just to see how you like that. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video and have a really super great time. Thanks a lot.